We had already recorded humanity's surrender speech before humanity knew it was supposed to surrender. That was the first mistake, though at the time it felt efficient. The Galactic Concord did not wait for smaller civilizations to understand their place. We announced it for them. We polished the language, selected the music, prepared the translation packets, and scheduled the broadcast for every public channel from the core worlds to the outer mining belts. Earth, according to our analysts, would panic within 6 minutes, beg within 20, and accept supervision before the first hour ended. No one laughed at those numbers because no one in that room believed they were jokes. We had done this before. 19 systems had received our warnings. 19 systems had folded themselves neatly into Concord law. Most of them thanked us afterward, at least in public. So when a blue-green planet on the edge of a minor spiral arm refused our first diplomatic correction, we did not call it courage. We called it immaturity. Humans were young, too loud, too emotional, too divided by flags, borders, languages, and whatever ancient arguments they kept preserving like family heirlooms. Their military files were almost embarrassing. Chemical rockets, kinetic weapons, orbital infrastructure that looked as if someone had built it in a garage with a government grant and too much coffee. They measured distance in miles, food in calories, and national pride in sporting events. The senior council found them charming in the way one finds an animal charming before it knocks over furniture. I was there in the broadcast chamber, standing beside the central display, watching Earth rotate in clean holographic light. White clouds moved over blue oceans. Brown continents rested under a thin atmosphere. It looked harmless. It looked delicate. It looked like a world that could be frightened by a shadow. Counselor Varen tapped one claw against the table and said, "Prepare the surrender announcement." Not the ultimatum. Not the warning. The surrender announcement. That was how certain we were. Below the hologram, a human name waited in the diplomatic queue. Mason Reed, Temporary Envoy, United. Earth Emergency Council. Temporary. Even their titles sounded improvised. Someone asked if we should delay the broadcast until Reed responded. Varen made a soft clicking sound of amusement. Why wait for a primitive to say what history has already decided? The chamber approved the phrasing. Earth acknowledges the wisdom of Concord protection. Humanity accepts peaceful integration. All defensive assets will be placed under supervision for the safety of galactic civilization. It was clean, respectable, merciful, we thought. Then the live channel opened, and Mason Reed appeared on the main screen. He was not kneeling. He was not surrounded by frantic officials. He wore no uniform, no medals, no ceremonial armor. Just a dark jacket, a white shirt, and the calm expression of a man answering a routine phone call. Behind him, through a window, I could see daylight over Washington, D.C., and traffic moving like nothing important was happening. That bothered me before I understood why. Varen leaned forward and began the formal declaration, voice heavy with borrowed destiny. Mason Reed listened without interrupting. Not once. Not when we called Earth unstable. Not when we described humanity as a regional hazard. Not when we informed him that the surrender broadcast had already been prepared for his convenience. He only glanced down at something off-screen, perhaps a note, perhaps a casualty projection, perhaps nothing at all. Then he looked back up. His eyes were ordinary brown. His voice was quiet. "You made the video already?" The room froze for half a second, not from fear, not yet, but from confusion. Varen blinked all four eyes. "Yes," he said, "to prevent unnecessary disorder." Mason Reed nodded once, almost politely. That is when I noticed he was not surprised. He was confirming something. A detail. A pattern. A decision we had made before understanding the cost of making it. Then the human gave the smallest smile I had ever seen, and somehow it made the chamber feel colder. "Good," he said. "Keep it ready. You are going to need a correction." That little smile should have been entered into the Concord thread archive. Not the fleet counts. Not the engine signatures. The smile. Because every species has a moment before disaster when the universe offers one final warning, and ours arrived wearing a dark jacket from a planet we had categorized as administratively inconvenient. Counselor Varen did not understand it. None of us did. He mistook Mason Reed's calm for theater, the same way one might mistake a locked door for decoration. The human channel remained open, and for a few silent seconds the chamber simply stared at him. Then Varen laughed. It was a controlled diplomatic laugh, polished by decades of speeches and conquests disguised as peacekeeping. "You misunderstand your position," he said. "Humanity is not negotiating from strength." Mason did not answer immediately. He looked down again, made a small note with a pen, an actual ink pen, and that tiny primitive gesture irritated half the room more than any insult could have. The Concorde used neural tablets, predictive language engines, decision clouds that could model trade disputes across 40 star systems before breakfast. Mason Reed used a pen. To us, that confirmed everything the analysts had written. Humans were clever, yes, but clever in the way a child is clever when stacking kitchen chairs to reach a cookie jar. Dangerous only to themselves. Our cultural division had spent months studying Earth, and their report had become required reading for anyone involved in the operation. Humanity was labeled a civilized mistake. Not savage enough to ignore. Not advanced enough to respect. A species that built hospitals beside weapons factories, sent music into space before learning who might hear it, and argued publicly about everything from tax rates to sandwich names. Their governments changed constantly. Their citizens criticized their own leaders in public. Their entertainment involved fictional disasters, competitive shouting, and people running after balls across grass fields measured in yards. We considered that evidence of instability. Looking back, it was evidence of practice. They had been disagreeing with each other for thousands of years and somehow still built bridges, satellites, submarines, cities of glass, and supply networks that moved breakfast across 6,000 miles before sunrise. We saw division. We did not see flexibility. We saw noise. We did not see speed. We saw emotion. We did not see fuel. Varen waved a claw, and the main display shifted from Mason's face to the assessment file. Earth appeared again, covered in neat red labels. Limited orbital control. Fragmented political structure. High internal conflict. Low compliance probability. Moderate technological growth. Severe cultural unpredictability. The chamber liked that last phrase. Severe cultural unpredictability sounded scientific. It sounded like something one could manage with enough pressure. Mason watched the labels appear over his planet without changing expression. Varen began reading them aloud, not because Mason needed to hear them, but because the council enjoyed hearing weakness organized into categories. "Your species mistakes stubbornness for principle," he said. "You mistake argument for freedom. You mistake local courage for strategic power. Humanity is not being punished, Mr. Reed. It is being corrected." Several council members made approving sounds. I made one too. I am not proud of that now. Mason set the pen down. Very carefully. The sound was soft, barely more than a tap through the transmission speakers. Still, every translator in the room picked it up. He leaned forward just enough for the light from Washington to catch one side of his face. "You keep saying humanity is divided," he said. "That is true. We argue about everything. We argue in courtrooms, in diners, in comment sections, in parking lots after Little League games. We argue because we are allowed to." Then his voice dropped, not louder, not colder, just flatter. "But there is one thing you are about to learn about humans." Varen's amusement faded by a fraction. Mason continued. "We can fight each other all day. The moment someone from outside hits one of ours, the argument ends." The strangest thing about Mason Reed was not that he threatened us without raising his voice. It was that he looked like a man who had already finished the hard part and was simply waiting for everyone else to catch up. The chamber expected performance from him. We expected flags behind him. Generals crowding the room. Emergency lights flashing across frightened faces. Some desperate attempt to make Earth look larger than it was. Instead, the human stood in a quiet government office with a coffee cup near his left hand and morning traffic sliding through the city behind him. No armor. No ceremonial sash. No security team. Not even a visible earpiece. Just one man, one pen, and the unsettling patience of someone letting a bad salesman finish his pitch. Counselor Varen noticed it too, though he interpreted it incorrectly. He turned slightly toward us, his mouth plates curving in satisfaction. "You see," he said, not bothering to mute the channel. "No military presence. No chain of command. They sent a clerk." Several council members relaxed. A clerk was understandable. A clerk could be pressured. A clerk could sign things while pretending the choice had been his. Mason heard every word. He picked up his coffee, took one calm sip, and said, "Technically, I used to manage logistics." That made the room laugh again. I remember the sound clearly because it was the last easy laugh the Concorde ever had. Logistics, to us, meant warehouses, fuel schedules, meal packets, spare parts, boring little systems that allowed important people to do important things. We did not understand that human history had trained entire generations to respect the person who knew where everything was, how fast it could move, and what broke first when pressure arrived. Mason Reed had not come to impress us. He had come because Earth did not send the loudest man when math was required. Varen leaned back, pleased with himself. Then you understand numbers, Mr. Reed. Our fleet tonnage exceeds your combined orbital mass by a factor of 87. Our active personnel outnumber your space-capable defense forces by margins your own systems cannot properly display. Our industrial reserves could replace any losses before your factories finished repainting a shuttle. Mason listened to the translation, then nodded as if the numbers were interesting but incomplete. That sounds expensive, he said. The council went quiet. Varen blinked. Expensive? Mason set the cup down. To move, I mean. To feed. To fuel. To coordinate. To ensure politically. To explain to your citizens if something embarrassing happens in public. A thin line appeared between Varen's eyes. You are attempting humor. No, Mason said. I am attempting accuracy. That was when our financial minister, who had been silent until then, shifted in his chair. Just a small movement. Barely noticeable. Mason noticed. I noticed Mason noticing. He was not watching our soldiers. He was not watching our weapons display. He was watching the people who counted costs, approved routes, authorized repairs, and feared delays. A clerk, Varen had called him. But the human had entered the room through the one door none of us had guarded. The boring door. The administrative door. The door every empire forgets because it does not look heroic on a statue. Mason looked from face to face on the council feed, then back to Varen. You built a system that wins by making everyone afraid of your fleet, he said. That works until someone stops looking at the fleet. My throat tightened before I knew why. On the side display, Earth remained covered in red labels, but now those labels felt less like weaknesses and more like questions we had failed to ask. Mason Reed had no uniform because he was not there to posture. He had no medals because he did not need our respect. He had no guards because, at that distance, we could not touch him. And when he smiled again, smaller than before, I finally understood the first rule of dealing with humans. The calm one is rarely the harmless one. Then Varen made the decision every conquered world remembered and no human would ever forgive. He stopped trying to win the conversation and ordered the Concorde to win the room. At first, I thought he only meant another display of authority, maybe a stronger warning, maybe a sanctions packet, maybe one of those ridiculous diplomatic punishments that sounded civilized because they came with a seal and a signature. But Varen turned to Fleet Command and said, select a minor colony. Minimal strategic value. Maximum visibility. The words moved through the chamber like cold air. Nobody objected. That is the part one still hear when I try to sleep. Not alarms. Not shouting. The silence of important people deciding that a small place on a distant map could be used as punctuation. Mason Reed watched us through the open channel. His expression did not change, but his hand moved toward the pen again. He wrote something down. One short line. Varen noticed and smiled. You are documenting history, Mr. Reed? Mason looked up. I am documenting names. Varen dismissed that with a flick of one claw. Fleet Command brought up 3 targets. A weather station on Mars. An orbital fuel depot above the moon. A civilian mining colony near the asteroid belt, 740 million miles from Earth, built into a slow-turning rock the humans called Halley Ridge. It had families, schools, water recyclers, a baseball field under a dome, and a diner called Maggie's because humans apparently carried restaurants into the void like sacred objects. The tactical officer called it lightly defended. Varen called it appropriate. Mason said nothing. That was worse than anger. Anger makes noise. Mason Reed became quiet in a way that made my translator lower its own volume. Varen leaned toward the transmission. This will be a proportional correction. A non-fatal demonstration. Your people will see the cost of defiance without suffering the cost of full resistance. There it was again, our favorite lie, wrapped in official language. We had said proportional before. We had said correction before. We had said peacekeeping before. Human eyes had a strange way of making old words sound dirty. Mason asked one question. Are there children on Halley Ridge? The chamber did not like that. It made the target feel less like an icon and more like a place. The tactical officer checked the file. Civilian dependents are present, he said. Varen's patience thinned. Their presence is irrelevant. The colony was selected precisely because it is visible, not valuable. Mason nodded once. Not in agreement. In confirmation. Then the order went out. Across the tactical wall, a Concorde cruiser shifted position outside the asteroid belt and released a precision pulse toward Halley Ridge. No dramatic explosion filled the screen. No heroic music. Just a clean white flash against black space, followed by a dozen status lights turning amber. Power interruption. Communications disruption. Dome integrity stable. Emergency shelters active. The chamber exhaled as if we had done something merciful. Varen spread his claws. You see, Mr. Reed? Controlled. Limited. Educational. Mason was looking at another screen now, one we could not see. For the first time, someone behind him moved quickly, passing a paper into his hand. He read it. His face remained calm. That calm had changed shape. Before, it had been patience. Now it was a door closing. Varen continued speaking, drunk on his own restraint. Tell Earth that the next demonstration can be avoided with immediate compliance. Mason folded the paper once, placed it beside the coffee cup, and looked directly into the chamber feed. The diner had a Tuesday breakfast special, he said. Varen stared at him. What? Mason's voice stayed level. Pancakes, eggs, bacon, and coffee for $6.99. My niece liked the hash browns when she visited last summer. No one in the chamber moved. We had expected a plea, a threat, a burst of emotion, something primitive enough to categorize. Instead, Mason Reed gave us breakfast. A tiny human detail from a tiny human colony we had just chosen to frighten an entire species. Then he asked for the casualty list. Mason Reed asked for the casualty list like he was asking for a receipt, and that made the council laugh harder than any threat could have. They thought he was hiding behind paperwork because paperwork was what weak civilizations did when power moved past them. They filed complaints. They requested investigations. They wrote statements for history books no one important would read. Varen even looked pleased, as if the human had finally stepped into the role assigned to him. Of course, he said, we will provide a formal incident summary after your government accepts the correction terms. Mason did not blink. I did not ask for your summary. I asked for the casualty list. The laughter thinned, not vanished. Thinned. There is a difference. Vanishing means fear has arrived. Thinning means arrogance has noticed a shape in the dark and is pretending it is furniture. The tactical officer checked the live feed from Halley Ridge and projected the basic emergency report onto the sidewall. Minor structural disruption. Medical response active. Civilian sheltering in progress. Communications delayed. No confirmed fatalities. Several injuries under evaluation. The chamber relaxed again. No confirmed fatalities meant we could still call ourselves restrained. It meant Varen could still use words like measured and lawful. It meant the historians could polish the event until it looked like discipline instead of pressure. Mason read the same report from his end. His eyes moved left to right. Slow. Careful. Human eyes did not glow, did not split into facets, did not flicker with ultraviolet warnings. They were terribly simple things, two small circles of attention, and somehow they made every line on that report feel heavier. Names, he said. Varen's crest lifted. You want individual names? Yes. Why? Mason looked up. Because numbers are how governments sleep at night. Names are how families stay awake. No one laughed that time. The sentence passed through the translators cleanly, but something about it refused to become alien. It stayed human. Specific. Annoying. Too small to dismiss and too large to answer. The tactical officer hesitated. Varen gave a sharp gesture, and the requested list began compiling. Mason waited. That was all he did. Waited. No speech. No pounding the desk. No desperate plea to Earth. Behind him, the office had changed. People moved faster now, but not in panic. That was the detail that bothered me. Panic has wasted motion. Panic bumps into furniture. Panic asks the same question twice. The humans behind Mason Reed moved with purpose, carrying folders, tablets, printed pages, old-fashioned maps, secure phones, coffee, more coffee. It looked less like a government collapsing and more like a machine waking up. One aide leaned in and whispered something. Mason nodded without looking away from us. Another placed a folder by his right hand. He opened it just enough for me to see colored tabs. Red, blue, yellow, green. The colors meant nothing to me then. Later, investigators would identify them as legal authority, emergency logistics, civilian evacuation, and economic response. The human had folders for our mistake. Ready folders. That should have stopped the room. It did not. Varen was too busy enjoying his own victory. He said, "Mr. Reed, your emotional attachment to a mining settlement is understandable, but irrelevant to the balance of power." Mason turned one page. "The colony is 2 miles wide," he said. "Population 12,419. It produces nickel, cobalt, water ice, and medical-grade silicates. It also has a school named after a teacher from Ohio who died before the first dome was completed." Varen's mouth plates tightened. "Sentimental details do not change strategic reality." "No," Mason said. "They change ours." The casualty list finished compiling. 37 names appeared on our wall, most marked stable, a few marked critical, all marked civilian. Mason copied them by hand. Every single one. The chamber waited because no one knew what else to do. When he finished, he placed the pen down again, perfectly parallel to the edge of the desk. Then he asked for 3 more things. The name of the officer who selected the target, the exact time the order was given, and the identification code of the cruiser that fired. Varen leaned forward. "For what purpose?" Mason looked almost tired then. Not weak. Not defeated. Tired in the way adults look when children have made a dangerous mess, and now someone responsible has to clean it up. "For accuracy," he said. "Your people are going to ask what happened. Mine already know." For 11 minutes, Earth stopped answering us. Not because the channel failed. Not because Mason Reed had lost connection. The transmission remained open, stable, crystal clear, and worse than any static could have been. Mason was still there. He simply stopped speaking. Behind him, Washington kept moving. Sunlight touched the tops of buildings. Cars rolled through intersections. Somewhere far below that office window, ordinary humans were buying coffee, missing buses, arguing about parking, and checking messages from people they loved. The world did not look frightened. That was the first thing Fleet Command noticed. The second thing was more difficult to explain. Human traffic patterns changed. Not visibly to the eye, not in some dramatic wave of evacuation, but in the quiet language of logistics. Aircraft turned away from major coastal routes. Cargo ships altered course by a few degrees. Emergency satellites moved into higher priority bands. Civilian networks began compressing data through channels our analysts had classified as outdated. Outdated. That word would become embarrassing later. Humans loved old systems the way they loved old tools in a garage. They did not throw things away just because something newer looked prettier. They kept backups. They kept paper. They kept radios. They kept cables buried under oceans and hard drives in sealed rooms, and people who knew how to repair machines without asking permission from a cloud. At minute 3, our surveillance division reported unusual activity in Earth orbit. Nothing aggressive, they said, merely coordination. Weather satellites began sharing sensor data with navigation platforms. Navigation platforms began talking to agricultural monitors. Agricultural monitors began talking to deep space telescopes built decades earlier by universities with names our translators struggled to render correctly. Varen waved it off. "Panic organization," he said. "Primitive societies often overconnect during crisis." At minute 5, the financial minister requested a private update from the Concord Reserve Bank. I saw his throat sack tighten when the answer arrived. He did not speak. Mason saw him not speaking. That seemed to be enough. At minute 6, one of our junior analysts asked why human civilian servers were suddenly rejecting Concord diplomatic traffic with a polite error message. The message read, "Access pending review." Polite. That was the part that made it worse. At minute 7, Fleet Command tried to recheck the identification code of the cruiser assigned to Halley Ridge. The file opened, then closed itself. No alarm. No warning. Just a clean administrative refusal stamped in 3 languages, including English. Authorization expired. Varen stood up then. Finally, he ordered the technicians to isolate the human channel, audit all network bridges, and verify that no foreign process had entered Concord systems. The technicians obeyed with professional confidence for approximately 30 seconds. Then their confidence began leaving the room one face at a time. Nothing had entered, they said. That was impossible. Nothing had breached the firewalls. Nothing had forced a door. Nothing had tripped a sensor. The systems were behaving as if every command came from someone with proper authority and excellent manners. At minute 9, Mason Reed looked at his watch. It was a plain metal watch with a dark leather band. Mechanical, we later learned. No signal. No network. No traceable interface. Humans, apparently, wore tiny machines that told time without asking the universe for help. At minute 10, Varen pointed at the screen and said, "Mr. Reed, explain what your government is doing." Mason did not answer. He turned one page in the green folder. Slowly, calmly, the sound of paper moving across paper filled the chamber speakers, and for the first time in my service, the Galactic Concorde listened to a human turn a page as if it were a countdown. At minute 11, every light in the broadcast chamber dimmed once, then returned to normal. No damage. No explosion. No chaos. Just a courtesy blink. Then every screen in the room, including the private council tablets, changed to the same image. Mason Reed, closer now, centered perfectly, looking at us as if the last 11 minutes had not been silence at all, but preparation. He finally spoke. "You attacked a place that serves pancakes on Tuesdays." Every screen in the Concorde chamber belonged to Mason Reed now, and the most humiliating part was how gently he took them. There was no warning siren, no flashing symbol, no crude human message painted over our systems. The displays simply obeyed him. The tactical wall, the council tablets, the fleet status boards, even the little private monitor Varen kept beside his chair for secure command updates, all showed the same calm human face. For one impossible second, the center of the Galactic Concorde was not a war room. It was a classroom, and the primitive at the front had decided the lesson could begin. Varen's claws scraped against the table. Cut the channel. No one moved fast enough. The technicians tried. Their hands flew across control surfaces, opening menus, canceling routes, rerouting power, invoking emergency authority. Each command returned the same response in formal Concorde script. Request received. Review in progress. It was polite. It was patient. It was horrible. Mason Reed looked slightly to the side, listening to someone we could not see. Then he nodded once and returned his attention to us. "Counselor Varen," he said, "you selected a civilian target because you believed humanity needed a public lesson." Varen rose to his full height. "You have no authority here." Mason's expression did not change. "That is correct. I do not have your authority. I have ours." The chamber doors locked. Not slammed. Locked. A soft tone confirmed it. The same harmless tone used when a meeting room reserved itself for privacy. Fleet Command began shouting over the internal link, but their voices came through fragmented, delayed, stripped of rank by automatic transcription. Admiral so-and-so became user. Supreme directives became pending requests. The Concorde's sacred hierarchy, the thing that had frightened planets into obedience for centuries, was being reduced to office language. Mason continued as if reading minutes from a town council meeting. At 9:42 Eastern Time, your cruiser, the ceremonial spear, interrupted power and communications at Halley Ridge. 37 civilians were injured. 12 children were in emergency shelters. One diner lost its roof garden. One school lost its main generator. No deaths were confirmed because your pulse was controlled, not because your judgment was. Varen tried to speak. Mason raised one finger. Not sharply, not dramatically, just enough. Varen stopped anyway. That was when I understood something terrible. The human was not demanding silence. We were giving it to him. Mason leaned closer to the camera. You mistook patience for permission. The words landed softly, and every adult in the chamber felt them harder than a shout. On the fleet display behind him, one by one, Concorde warships changed color from active green to administrative blue. Administrative hold. Weapons disabled pending inquiry. Navigation restricted pending civilian safety review. External communication limited pending legal verification. Our fleet had not been destroyed. That would have been simpler to understand. It had been placed on hold, like a payment dispute at a bank. The tactical officer whispered that the cruisers were still intact. Their crews were safe. Their engines were responding. They simply could not accept strategic commands. Every order had been wrapped in process, delayed by compliance checks, rerouted through civilian harm audits, and buried under forms with human names attached. Mason Reed had not broken our sword. He had made it fill out paperwork. Varen's voice cracked around the edges. This is an act of war. Mason looked almost disappointed. No, Counselor. You already chose that word. We are choosing the ending. The first thing the Concorde lost was not a ship. It was confidence. That sounds small until you understand that confidence was the main engine of the Empire. Our fleets ran on fuel, yes, and our stations ran on reactors, but the Concorde itself ran on the belief that every order would be obeyed before the ink dried. Mason Reed reached through that belief and pulled out one little wire at a time. Across the strategic wall, the blue administrative holds spread from the cruiser near Halley Ridge to every vessel assigned to the Earth operation. Then they moved farther. Escort ships in the inner corridor. Refueling tenders outside the trade lanes. Ammunition depots on quiet moons. Repair docks orbiting our capital. Nothing exploded. Nothing burned. That was the genius of it. The universe did not give us a dramatic disaster we could understand. It gave us 1,000 locked doors, and every key had suddenly become a question. Fleet Command demanded override authority. The system requested civilian impact statements. Treasury tried to release emergency funds. The banks requested identity confirmation from officers whose accounts had been frozen for legal review. Communications tried to warn allied systems. Their messages left the chamber, traveled 6 inches, and politely returned with delivery pending. Varen shouted for the old military channels, the ones supposedly isolated from civilian networks, the ones we bragged had survived 3 rebellions and a solar flare. Those opened too. Then they displayed a scanned copy of the Halley Ridge target order with Varen's authorization seal highlighted in yellow. That was when the room understood the humans had not hacked us in the way criminals hack a lock. They had read us. They had mapped the habits we thought were too boring to defend. Procurement codes, insurance claims, supply manifests, docking schedules, court procedures, emergency liability clauses, the quiet pipes of civilization. Mason Reed had not sent a warrior into our house. He had sent accountants, lawyers, engineers, data clerks, and someone's exhausted uncle who probably fixed servers in a basement in Kansas. The result was worse than an invasion because an invasion gives leaders someone to point at. This gave us paperwork with perfect signatures. On one screen, our reserve fleet remained fully powered but unable to depart because its maintenance certification had been challenged by a human safety office created 18 minutes earlier. On another, 3 planetary governors requested clarification on whether supporting Varen would expose their trade rights to immediate suspension under our own Concorde civilian protection statutes. Our laws, our language, our seals. Human hands moved them like pieces on a board. The financial minister finally stood. His voice was so soft the translator almost missed it. Counselor, he said, we cannot pay the fleet. Varen turned slowly. What? The minister swallowed. Not because funds are missing. Because every transaction connected to the Earth operation now requires review by signatories who are currently unreachable, suspended, or asking why their names appear on a civilian strike file. Mason said nothing. He let our own people explain the defeat to themselves. That was another human cruelty, if you can call accuracy cruel. They did not need to humiliate us. They arranged the facts in a line and waited for us to walk into them. Then the public channels opened. Not ours. Earth's. Every Concorde world received the same comm broadcast, translated into every major language, showing Halley Ridge before and after the pulse. Children in shelters. Workers restoring power. A school principal thanking emergency crews. The diner owner standing under a damaged sign, promising that Tuesday pancakes would be served again by next week. No screaming. No revenge chant. No staged outrage. Just people. Normal people. Specific people. The kind empires prefer to keep blurry. Mason Reed appeared at the end of the broadcast. The surrender video you prepared for Earth is incorrect, he said. We have uploaded a revised version. Our main display changed again. The file name was simple. Concorde Retraction Statement. Varen looked smaller beneath those words. Mason leaned back, and for the first time since the call began, he looked away from the council and toward someone in his office. Tell Halley Ridge, he said, they have 11 minutes to decide whether they want the roof garden repaired in glass or aluminum. The Concorde did not sign the retraction because it wanted peace. It signed because every alternative had been quietly removed from the table before anyone noticed the table was gone. Varen stared at the document on his private monitor, Hands still, crest lowered, voice trapped somewhere between pride and survival. The statement was humiliating in the cleanest possible way. It admitted that Earth had not initiated hostilities. It admitted that Halley Ridge had been a civilian settlement. It admitted that the Concord action had violated its own protection charter. It did not call humans superior. It did not have to. The facts did that by standing there in order, neat as church shoes on a Sunday morning. Mason Reed waited while our legal minister reviewed the text. He did not smile now. That made it worse. Victory should look excited. It should shine, shout, parade itself through the room. Human victory sat in a dark jacket with cold coffee and asked whether the apology would be transmitted in high definition. Varen tried one final maneuver. If we agree, he said, you will release our fleet? Mason turned a page. Your fleet will be released after relief supplies reach Halley Ridge, after all injured civilians are compensated, after the cruiser crew submits testimony, and after the Concord accepts an independent safety corridor around every human settlement within 200 million miles. Varen's mouth plates tightened. That is an occupation. Mason shook his head. No, that is a fence. There is a difference. The council chamber stayed silent. We had spent centuries building walls around weaker species and calling them protection. Now a human had built one around his people and called it property line. Somehow the translation made it sound very American. The retraction broadcast went out 12 minutes later. Across the Concord, citizens watched their leaders apologize to a world they had been told would kneel. They saw Halley Ridge workers repairing power lines. They saw children leaving shelters in oversized jackets. They saw a diner owner hang a handwritten sign that said pancakes still happen. That sign became more dangerous than any weapon in our archives because it made the Empire look exactly as small as it was. Varen resigned before the next cycle. Officially, for health reasons. Unofficially, because every governor, banker, shipmaster, and clerk in the Concord suddenly understood that humans could reach places armies never thought to guard. Not secret bunkers. Not command towers. Calendars. Payroll systems. Shipping forms. Insurance clauses. The soft belly of civilization. Mason Reed ended the call after one final sentence. It was not a threat. Humans are careful with threats. They know threats can be ignored. This was a policy. He looked into the camera and said, "Do not make us organize." Then the screen returned to normal, as if our entire century of confidence had only been interrupted by a scheduled maintenance notice. In the years that followed, the academies rewrote their manuals. The word retaliation was removed from the old combat index and placed under strategic containment events. Young officers were taught that human silence is never empty. Human paperwork is never harmless. Human patience is not surrender. The corrected surrender video remained, sealed in the archive, not because it was classified, but because no one could bear to watch it. I watched it once. It was only 34 seconds long. The Concord emblem appeared, then Earth, then Mason Reed's revised line in plain white letters. Humanity does not seek conquest. Humanity does not enjoy conflict. But if you mistake restraint for weakness, we will teach you the difference in a language your grandchildren will study. That was the day the galaxy learned a new rule. Do not corner humans. Do not strike their small towns. Do not laugh at their old systems, their paper folders, their diners, their Tuesday breakfast specials, or the quiet man taking notes with an ink pen. We thought humans were divided, primitive, emotional, and slow. We were wrong in the most expensive way possible. They were never slow. They were careful. They were never weak. They were waiting to be certain. And once humans are certain, the war is usually over before the galaxy understands it has begun.